If I told you the things I've seen on my ways, if I told you the things I've done in my days, you wouldn't believe me anyway. So it's best I just don't say. I've lived 1,000 lives, I've piloted 1,000 souls, I killed and fought and died just for a single role.
Years fly by like dead leaves.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Welcome
We
to
wanna
Small
hello.
Game Hunter.
Yeah.
Death and Destruction Edition.
Death and Destruction Edition.
Yeah.
You know, today we are going to be discussing a game called Skeletons by Jason Morningstar, Bully Pulpit Games. It's a great little storytelling game where you play the skeletons of a dungeon, and the whole concept of the thing is basically that ancient and innumerable time passing as you're lonely and you try to fight off monsters in a dungeon. But the game starts off with a really neat little thing where it sort of sets the tone of the actual game. But before we start that, I'm Jim,
Tomes.
Gina.
And I'm Tappy.
and they joined us a little while ago, and we sat down and played a game of skeletons, and we're here to tell you about it. Okay, so the way we start off with this is basically a segment we call the takeaway, which is where we basically tell you the things that we took from the game and the elements that we liked, maybe some things that disturbed us or we disliked, or whatever elements that we think we might incorporate into other things.
Can I grab that?
Yeah. Right.
Thank you. Mine is missing. Stuff.
So let's start with you, Tappy. What did you think about this game?
I think this is a campfire game. Like when you're at camp or when you're with your family, like around the campfire, you know how you do the thing where you tell a story where somebody does like a sentence or a paragraph and somebody else does a sentence or paragraph, and you kind of go around the campfire telling a story where you don't know where it's going to go. That is what this is. It is almost exactly that. All of the, in my opinion, all of the rules and things you're supposed to do set tone and guide you down the type of story you're supposed to be telling. And that is of these skeletons that are animated to protect this tomb. There are things like you have different skeletons that you get to choose, and that's super cool. Like getting a personality also that you get to tell a story about, but isn't like dictated to you, is also super cool. But it's very much for me that, you know, you just had a bunch of s'mores, you're around the campfire, you just went hiking or whatever like that, and you're telling stories, or you're not telling stories, you're collaboratively telling one story around the campfire.
Well,
So
I like that you said because you get your skeleton and it's doesn't dictate. It gives you some flavor to the skeleton, but you get to flesh out your skeleton.
Literally flesh it out.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All you get is a pile of bones.
Yeah.
You literally get sort of like a gray sketch of just a skeleton, and then you're
and you get to draw in it like laser ponies.
exactly.
Yeah.
My drawing skills.
We actually have some right there of the
Is
outsider.
this on screen?
No, because
Okay.
the dice cam isn't on the
Gotcha.
screen for this one.
Right
I
on.
can make it be if you want.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
No, let's
do
make it
Show 'em. I
big.
wanna show them. I want to show
Dice
them.
can't. Dice
Dice
can't. Do it.
But you're given
That'd
sort
be
of
great
like
for the audio version.
a little list of the things, the trappings of the skeleton. They're not drawn on the actual skeleton themselves. You're therefore encouraged to actually doodle on your skeleton and add those elements yourself.
And that also allows people to bounce
There we
off
go.
of that information. Again, like having that whole like discovering who your character is, not just through what you do, but what other people do.
Well, it's exactly the way that the game is. It's designed for you to end up really discovering who your character is.
There is not much of a game, quote unquote, to this, though. It is very much exactly like what I said, just telling stories telling a story around the campfire. If you are expecting a game in which there is some sort of randomization, in which there is some sort of concrete stuff to it, you're not going to get that from this game.
Yeah, mechanically it's like super light.
It's like 6 pages?
Well, it's 6 pages, but like even then, there's a lot of smaller...
Campfire inside.
Nice. A lot of smaller micro games where like mechanics are still very important. Here, there is no even randomizer that's even necessary to the game at all, right? Other than just the players or whatever, right?
Right.
It's a bullshit story game.
It's a bullshit story.
It's a bullshit story.
Which we say with love, because a friend of ours always says that.
Yeah. No, I mean, making shit up and it's just bullshitting. That's the thing I love about role playing games.
Yeah.
But I mean, like the tone of it is so much that like you play by candlelight, kind of just like by firelight. There are times that darkness is really important to the game, and so all of the rules just set tone as opposed to kind of dictate how the story goes per se.
Yeah. I mean, you'll find that a lot of these sort of like storytelling games, things like this. I mean, even 10 Candles is this way in a lot of this respects, in that the game sort of facilitates you understanding how the feel of the situation is, sets up a tension creator for you to like, you're heading towards death.
Yeah.
But really, mechanically speaking, you're not going, well, I want to shoot that guy in the face with a pistol, roll. That isn't the thing you have, and you just sort of say that this is what's going on.
I will be honest, now that you talk about 10 Candles, that I wish there was a 10 Candles-esque mechanic to this. That, like, when an age ends, maybe you snuff out a candle, or when you snuff out a candle, that's when you go into darkness. And there's a feeling of, rolling those dice to try and, like, deal with the adventures and people who come into your tomb, because that's... If nobody came into the tomb, you'd just be sitting in darkness forever, not doing anything.
The basic only mechanic of the game is telling you when the intruders came in and how much time passes afterwards.
Well, so one thing that I think is kind of interesting, like as far as that goes, is that, you don't have the mechanical game, right? Like 10 Candles has got the dice and all this kind of stuff. Like most of these games have that. And here you don't have it. What you do have as far as ritual is that sitting in silence part, right? And we'll talk about that when we get into the gameplay.
Oh, yeah,
but
for sure.
You're dealing with an intruder and all this stuff, and the skeletons are doing things. And then there's these periods of time, sometimes minutes, where we're just sitting in silence with our eyes closed or in the dark, right?
I did, just to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, Tappy, I did, because I remember at one point just asking a game question, like, what's the end game of this? Not the win condition, but like...
Yeah.
Because there
What's our
wasn't
goal? Where are we
something
going?
like snuffing out candles or and we definitely had a very satisfying progression to the end game, but we kind of met I think we were thinking about, we've got this kind of stuff, let's have a couple more moves.
When we were going in there is, I was reading through the stuff, and what I understood is like, okay, so what we're dealing with is a limited number of encounters over 3 stages of the game. The first couple of stages, the skeletons winning is a given until the very end. So what I wanted, and the other element that I saw in there is that there are, when you pass through ages over long periods of time, there are tables that you roll on to see what consequences happen. So a limb can fall off your skeleton. The potency of the magic that's animating your skeleton starts wearing away. Your weapon is broken, and those type of things are the fact that they're completely voluntary. And you don't have to check any of those things off. I understand a lot of people really just have an aversion to having negative things happen to their character.
That's weird.
Which is really weird. But understandable. You invested some time in this thing. You like the guy. But here there's nothing really... The thing about this game is nothing's ever pushed or foisted on you. Everything is a choice, and you don't have to do anything. And it could be, and to the point where we even broke the rules when there was just like an end of age event, and I went, wouldn't it be cool if this happened?
Yeah.
And then we just sort of did an event within an event during that, because we had like this well of souls, or the cenote type thing, and I said that one of the consequences was the thing floods, the tomb floods. What happens? I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if because the way that I told the story in is that once you got into the water, there was this ghostly flesh that covered your skeleton, you sort of went back to life. So it's the barrier between life and death. And what I figured, wouldn't it be great if this thing overflowed into the tomb and everybody got to feel fleshy for a minute?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
And that was just like a really neat thing where nowhere in the rules did you say that you could do that. But everybody at the table said, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And that's the open and free form of this type of
And
game.
so I think one of the things the game does really well is it can be very flexible to that.
I was going to say, because
right?
it doesn't say you can't do
Because it doesn't
that.
say you can't, and all RPGs to some extent you can house rule and do different things. But with this game, it's almost it's almost expected that you can do that because there's no rules to break.
Yeah,
right?
it's really easy to house rule when there's no rules.
Well, and, to be fair, there's like some very basic structure of a
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
but there's no game. There is
Right.
no like actual like
Yeah.
mechanical game here. And I think like it's really good that you guys have brought this up and like we're focusing on that because I think coming into it, if you're bringing players into this, if you're gonna run this for your group or for some friends, those are the expectations you want to set, right? This is not we're
Yeah.
going in to play D&D. It's not we're playing D&D as skeletons because you're not
Yeah.
doing
Yeah,
that.
it's not
either.
D&D in reverse.
No, it's very much a different thing.
Well, and also like one of the things that I really like about this game, and we kind of talked about this in it,
Show
is
off
that
our sweet
this
mouth.
is a great way to work out for D&D, to like get your creative like muscles
Yep.
stronger, because there is no mechanical structure to deal with, so you have to come up with all of it. And the other thing that this game does that also 10 Candles does, more of the story type games do, is that idea of ritual, of there's a thing you all do together
Yep.
Yeah,
that really helps set tone.
Let me get Joseph
And-
Campbell heavy on you here, because that's exactly what I feel about that kind of thing. I think that's one of the things that's important to us as people is sort of like a ritual, and it creates a meditative state. And this game is almost about a meditative state.
But that's also something that you can bring into your RPGs. Like if you really want to, especially if you're in like some sort of magic heavy game. But in general, you can just kind of like do something like, now it might be silly, it might be stupid, and people don't want to do it. And that's fine too. But I think when you really set that tone, you let people start getting into it. Because the stuff that you're supposed to do in this game is kind of silly and kind of stupid. But once the candles are lit, once it's dark everywhere, once you've sat in darkness for a while and you had some oogie spooky alarm go off, it really starts to like bring you into that place where you can really be creative in that place. And I think for that alone, I think every role-playing group should take a week off or 2 weeks off, whatever it is, that when you play
This
and
game
just play this game.
revolves around all of the little things that are sort of added for flavor in other role-playing games. What are the important setting, turning down the lights, the music. You can actually download some music from Bully Pulpit that comply to that. Tomes actually had some really great stuff that he played, especially when you have to meditate for a little while. Part of the game, there's an alarm that goes off, and he had this really spooky sound that came up. Adding little things to the map and things. All these things are never considered things that are really necessary for you to play a traditional role playing game. They just add more feel to it. This game is all those things packed into one game.
I think so too, and I think it's interesting because the last a couple of the small game hunters I've been on, and I'm thinking about the other ones too, but they are absolutely games you can kind of mentor somebody into role playing. So it doesn't even have to be your group, and it's like, hey guys, this will like exercise our creative muscles about what we can fill in the blanks in the corners of in our D&D game. This is something like you were saying, it's a campfire game. It could also be a dinner party game or a party game
in general.
Yeah, because it is very rules light, but it is when I sent out my tweet that we were going to be talking about this today, I was saying we came up with a very lore rich game and very pardon me again for saying fleshed out characters.
Yeah.
And from
Boomed out.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Oh yeah.
But all of that from just exercising, and I have to say, I've been not role playing as long as some of you guys have been, but I have been now heavily playing for 7
Lots of
years.
That is many years.
Yeah,
That is,
it is.
you are no longer the new kid on the block.
No, exactly. And plus,
Greater than 25% of your life, you're an expert.
for the amount of games I've played too. But there will be a time every single session in a game like this or a game like For the Queen that I sit down and somebody will do something in game where my Gina brain goes, oh, I can do that kind of shit. hell yeah, I'm going to do that shit. Like where you kind of turn the dial to 11, where it's like you're thinking you're exercising these particular muscles in this scenario you set up, but I mean, the sky's the limit.
So the guy who wrote this, we said, was Jason Morningstar,
Yeah.
and he's also responsible for Fiasco and some other games. But some of the advice he really gives online around playing these kind of games and playing games in general, LARPs and things like that. There's like this bullet point of a couple things like, be kind, be obvious, right? Like, don't try to be creative and come up with the most weirdo thing that nobody expects. Just like do a thing. People will roll off of each other and snowball into interesting creative things. But one of them is ask questions, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you're going to run this game, and especially if you're going to run it with people like as a dinner party, either people who don't normally play these kind of games, or if you have an RPG group and maybe they're used to playing a very mechanical kind of like, war game, right, or D&D or whatever, and they're not used to just like, well, I'm going to make things hard for myself, or I'm going to, cause my character to get harmed, or other things that might be new to them. Just as a facilitator, it just helps to really kind of like ask those questions, right? When we started out the game, it's like, wait, what's going on here? Like where are we supposed to be creative? Like I could tell we were all feeling out. Like, what are the rules? What are they telling us to do? Where can we kind of like push boundaries? And to your point, Gina, like what can we do? And as the facilitator, just play with that. Like guide a little bit by asking them questions. Somebody says like, yeah, my skeleton's over here. Okay, that's cool. That answers the question that's on the sheet. Where are they on the map?
Yeah.
But like, what's around them?
Yeah.
What is their
they
outfit
there?
look like?
Yeah.
What position are they in?
Yeah.
So ask those questions, and it kind of starts just getting people comfortable, like talking, and all of a sudden everybody's just like ecstatic, excited, and like.
I mean, if you saw
all
the
this
Companion's Tale episode
Yeah.
of Small Game Hunter, there's a lot of very similar elements in this. And one of the things that I loved about this game and that game is the fact that you have a visual representation at the beginning. One of the first things that you're asked to do in the game is start doodling on your character sheet and then create a map of where you're going to be. When everybody starts putting elements on this map, that's when things started really taking shape for me.
Right. And that's when like the lore really started suddenly coming out.
I mean, brilliant ideas where we had these alcoves with the 7 virgin queens.
sure.
Yeah.
And then we have a hand with 5 rings that had different animals, and the symbols matched over the alcoves of the 7 virgin queens. Just all these little things, and like immediately started getting my juices going. Oh, what's that about? What can I make up with that?
Should we kind of segue into like the materials?
Yeah,
and then
sure.
what our game might maybe looks like, or I'd love your little intro if you want to do that before we do the materials. The music was still playing.
It's totally fine.
Cool.
We can do that. But I think that
Cool.
that moment's is past.
yeah,
But
That's okay.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it off because it's
Yeah.
actually kind of neat because this is the first thing that you read when you open the game.
Yeah.
And you go, years fly by like dead leaves. Everything is darkness. Everything is silent. You stand vigilant before the sarcophagus without thought or breath. Such is your compulsion. You do not remember your name, and you still watch. The flesh has fallen off your bones, and you still watch. And that sets a pretty important tone at the very beginning of the thing of the type of horror that we're dealing with in this game. But immediately when we sat down, Tones pulled out a nice big 11 by 17 sheet of blank paper for us to draw on. And we had some fresh printouts of the character sheets, which are very similar to sort of like the play sheets you get for Powered by the Apocalypse type of thing.
Yeah, they're almost like archetypes, right?
They're
each
almost like
skeleton's got
archetypes,
like a name.
Because you have Outsider, you have Big Head, you have Silver Torque, you have Tattered Cape, and all these names are kind of silly and outside. But when you start looking at it, oh, okay, yeah, and it's
Silly and dark.
silly and
Yeah.
dark. But also there's a list of things, your accoutrement, and then you draw them in. And
Yep.
as you draw them in, I mean, when I chose the big head guy because it looked like sort of like a wizardy type of thing, and I wanted to do that. So I immediately, supposed to have like a little silver crown, so I immediately wrote one with like this eye on it. and the eye ended up being a magic item that it used for stuff. So immediately I started setting the pace for my character that way.
You know, whenever Big Head was said, the song Big Mouth by the Smiths goes into my head.
Oh, yeah.
Like, Big Head, ya-da-da-da, Big Head strikes again.
I'll add that to the playlist.
The character sheet, the map sheet, you also need the printout of the rules for you to check out. And there are 2 other sheets that are basically lists of items that happen that give you each individual age and then the consequence type of events that happen.
Now I want to rescan these as the Smiths.
That'd be amazing.
And we could just have, like, you find the Smiths in a,
in a tomb.
Andy Rourke is in the shadows because nobody pays attention to him.
I think, how long did our game take? It was like
about 4 hours.
Almost
once we
like 4?
Yeah.
I
Almost exactly.
mean, they say here, like,
it
again.
didn't seem like that.
Yeah, no, it didn't. But it says you need 1 or more hours, and definitely like a 1 hour game, you're getting like a feel for it, or you're playing like super fast and not really getting into that depth. But if you're just trying to showcase what this thing is, you can do that, right?
And like one thing you said when we were talking about this at the beginning was, you know, if you have D&D players who used to just like blasting through a dungeon, yeah, you can totally get this done. And it's like, where are you? I am here.
No, I can totally see
Okay.
If you're just following the rules and checking off boxes, this game will go like that.
Right.
The real beauty and the real magic of this game is when you take time and attention to actually really narrate what's going on and sort of cooperatively tell a story.
Oh, what you do is whenever you say something cool, everybody takes a drink. And so people who want to get hammered are like, no, that was cool.
Yeah, and the more drunk you are, the more entertaining you get, right?
But, or entertained.
1 hour game.
Outside of the rules, the character sheets, some pens, probably colored pencils to draw on there. Also, what's important is some kind of timer and maybe some kind of audio device. Because there's a time element where you're basically to simulate what the horror is of being totally and completely silent with nothing to do during eons between the encounters. You actually sit down and you meditate for a little while. You just sit there in quiet, and then an alarm goes off. And the creepier the alarm, the better.
That was the most difficult part of the game for me. It took forever. Like, we sat silent for 50 minutes.
Oh, my God.
So I mentioned on the Bully Pulpit website.
Right. Well, you were the one who actually went and checked it out. Like, what did you?
Yeah,
find
there's an actual app that has, so even if you don't feel like you can find your own creepy timer, or Tomes had very cool creepy music for us when, you know, very contemplative creepy music.
Right.
So when we were meditating, but on the Bully Pulpit site, there's actually an app so that it's
like a soundboard app for.
Yep. And it's by the intervals. So whether you're, you know, a day or a week or an epoch.
Yeah, that's really cool.
I'll say that. So I've probably run this thing like over half a dozen times, and a couple times at con. And cons can be very difficult because you don't necessarily have a quiet place. Like some cons, like Big Bad or whatever, you might get a private room, and that would be great. But I have played this in kind of like a more open venue where there is background noise. That's not the best. Obviously, if you have some kind of audio thing, that might distract people a little bit and give them something to focus on.
Right.
But even if it's just like not completely silent, but just sitting there in silence, and if the background, like a con, is a little more like buzzy, then that's not too bad. So you'll take what you can get. But you don't need audio for this, obviously. Like the best thing is having like a silent, quiet place without distracting background stuff.
One thing we might want to go over now is the eons, or the difference. Like, there are different time periods, time passes, and time passes differently based on how long you play in the game.
So, like I said, there are 3 basic phases to the game.
Yeah.
Okay. The first thing that you do is you choose your character, you sort of figure out who it is, and then everybody takes a turn putting on elements onto the map. But then you go on to the very first actual play phase.
I'm going to interrupt you from that choosing the character part, and we talked about it a little bit already, but one of the very important things that I think we want to mention is that even though there are questions on the sheet, you answer almost none of them at first, right?
Right.
So most of those are about your skeleton's past, and the great part about this game is you start as these skeletons who know nothing about themselves, right? You're here as a guardian.
Yeah, you're just
right?
an automaton.
But as things happen, you start to answer these questions and kind of fill in that backstory. And so this is, like you're saying, we were talking about bringing this to people who either haven't played these kind of games or your RPG group. Like, this is kind of playing with concepts that some of them might not be used to, which is starting with that kind of like tabula rasa, like blank slate.
Yeah, which is
but
awesome. But the thing is, just like Kimmy took elements of other games that we played to sort of create a sort of world generating thing. You can take this type of game and literally turn it into a session 0 for characters, where you have a blank slate and then you start progressively answering questions through the telling of the story, and then you end up having. So it's one of the ways that you can use these type of games to inform other games. But
you finish choosing.
You choose your characters, you do the thing, and then you go into the first age, and the first time so everything's fresh, everything's new. You're full of vim and vinegar, and the threats are relatively low. It's kind of like they're spiders. Spiders. Beetles.
Oh, yeah, we had the beetles.
We had beetles pour out of a wall.
The beetles are kind of difficult to
Oh yeah,
deal
this
with.
was later.
And it's like, how do we do? No one has a flamethrower. Like,
Yeah, exactly. This
how
is
do we
hard.
deal with 2 million beetles
And
coming
we're
into
very
our thing?
creative how 4 skeletons were
But
going
to
to
be
kill 2
fair,
million beetles.
we made it 2 million beetles, right?
Yeah.
It could have
Yeah.
just been like
Yeah.
a spider.
Yeah, it could have been just
Like
a
the
giant
stakes
spider.
are supposed to be relatively low.
Yeah, the stakes are low, but more importantly, what happens at the end of every encounter, you choose the amount of time that is elapsed between the next encounter. And in the first session, you can pick immediately a day, a month, a year. Not a lot of time passes. And when you start getting into larger amounts of time, that's when you start looking at this other chart of what happens to your skeletons as you progress. So bad things could happen. You lose things, you lose memories that you've already gotten, you lose parts of your skeleton, you lose equipment from your skeleton.
Things happen to the tomb as
Things
well.
happen to the
right?
tomb as
like
well.
walls
Yeah.
can collapse or other things.
Right, and this is to mark the passage of time and the ruinous power of time. But as when you play each individual encounter, you can choose to remember something about your skeleton. You resolve the situation, sort of like a round robin storytelling sort of thing. What if this happened? What if this happened? We were actually very good about making sure that everybody had a lot of input into what was going on. Yeah. One of the things that's kind of difficult to manage in these type of games, that if you have one person that really just wants to tell the entire story, and a lot of people that don't really feel like they can or want to, you have somebody sort of just take over. So it's really important for you guys to share. This is a sharing game.
That's why you have a tack hammer on the side, just so they remember.
Yeah. And then there's
Like
the
the
second
sword of
age,
Damocles.
which has longer period of times, and then the very third one, you can pass eons of time in between, and all kinds of crazy shit happens. And at the end, it's basically understood that's when you finally wear away and the tomb is finally overcome.
I think one cool thing that, and there's this whole separate section at the end of the game that Jason's put together around like bonus material, and it's things to keep in mind, or okay, you've played once, how might you mix it up the next time around? And one thing to your point here about, we're answering these questions as we go, right?
Yeah.
And maybe all 4 of us are individually answering questions about what our skeletons are kind of remembering during this intrusion about our past. But the way you remember things, that's kind of a little bit up to you how to flavor. You can totally be basic and be like, okay, I remember my name, it's this, right?
Yeah, and
you can go that simple.
I don't think any of us did, but you could.
No, none of us did.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the recommendations is, feel free to start playing with that, right? Is this a flashback? Like, tell us what this flashback looks like, right?
Right.
Or, is this like some kind of like telepathic communication that we're having right now? Because part of the game says, like, we can all communicate, telepathically with each other, right?
Right.
So, it's kind of up to us to flavor it, as story game bullshitty as we want, or,
Oh, and that also reminds me that, like, one thing you said is that it doesn't have to be a D&D dungeon. It can be anywhere. It can be space,
Yeah.
It can be, like, one thing that comes to mind for me is the library episode of Doctor Who,
Oh, for sure.
right?
Yeah,
Where
where
it's
we
the-
meet River Song.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so, like, you have all these different ways that you can put this together, especially if you've played a lot of D&D, you don't want to do it, or you don't play D&D, so you want to do something else.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
And so I'll say to that end, like, I've played it in space 2 or 3 times, maybe 3 times, and I specifically have, me, I have like a little bag of Legos that's specifically for this. Like, you actually build the crypt kind of like out of like a little Lego thing, but and with the little space guys. But the reason I mentioned the space thing is because, again, like you're saying, Tappy, you can kind of like mix up the concepts, right? Like, as skeletons, like what's controlling us. We don't really know, but we all know some of those tropes, right? Is it like some kind of lich thing or a wizard that casts some spell on us or who knows what, right?
No, I mean,
or
I was
something.
full on expecting like some kind of mummy or lich to come out of the crypt. You know what we had? We had an egg, an unhatched egg that brought forth the being of the apocalypse. It was the shit. But
like-
the three phases are the unsealed tomb, the time of dust, and the desecration. Just so
Right.
it's on the table.
With the space one, like what I ended up finding is, we have this conversation at the table, each time, and it's like, what do we think is controlling us? Like, are we dead, or are we actually like astronauts or some other aliens that have been mind controlled, or is there some kind of like fungus that's invaded us? And so it's kind of like, again, you can skin it in different ways. There is I know in the Gauntlet forums right now, I saw a thread recently, and Gregory Gilder is putting together a droids hack of this, because Rich Rogers runs like a Saturday Star Wars game where he uses different systems to play Star Wars games. So he's using this, or the idea is to use this, the skeletons, to be droids like on Jabba's palace, right? And like the palaces failed maybe, and now you're just these droids sitting there, right? So like you could totally skin this in like a couple different ways, right?
Yeah.
I really like the idea that they're power suits and there's skeletons in them, but the skeletons are dead. It's the power suit have like these robotic intelligences that over time are
it's like
becoming more and more
robotics.
intelligent.
Totally. I think that's
right.
right. Yeah.
So 10 million years go by and they have so much more.
Those memories can be like little parts of like pilot memories.
Yeah.
Is it even
Right,
to
right,
remember?
right.
Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean anymore?
Hey man, if you remember that old show Robotics, where the consciousnesses of the people were put onto the giant robots, and the two factions had to fight
Oh,
each
cool.
other.
I do like though that, like you were saying this, or we've said this earlier in our takeaways, but also in the setup for the sequence for the game, but that you choose whatever type of intruder it is. You're choosing how much time elapses between, so how much time you're meditating, and what those stakes maybe are because of the time that elapsed.
Yeah.
But you are also choosing whether or not, because you try to defeat. Are you going to try to defeat the intruder in the tomb, or is there something else at that point that your skeleton is, because you choose whether you want to answer questions about your past or not, too.
Right.
I mean, that's all just...
And as we saw in a couple of the encounters, like some of us would go off and get distracted by a thing.
Yeah.
There's this intruder, but I'm having this memory that's really important,
Yeah.
so I'm going to be over here in the corner doing my own thing.
Oh
Yeah.
no, ADHD skeletons.
Yeah. And another element that I loved is kind of like, Tappy would come up with something on the fly for his character, and basically I or somebody else would draw a connection to something that was coming up, because he
Yeah.
decided that his character's name was the Kingslayer.
Right.
So this knight a spectral knight came in and was like, I'm going to put a crown on him. He's going to have, a ghostly form of Tappy's sword in his chest going, what the F? So, and that sort of connected dots between story elements, and everybody
did.
started doing that. And it started becoming a more cohesive story about the group of us in a lot of ways, because we basically became connected.
There are, yeah, and there are stakes to it though, because with each intruder and with each time period that you go through, it tells you on it's the one sheet that has, I don't have it with me, but it's the one sheet that has the tomb tales.
Yeah.
So it'll tell you when you say, okay, a decade goes by or a month goes by, that you're going to go through two lists on, and they generally seem to follow like left column, right column.
Yeah.
So it's either like glory fades or God's laugh, or worlds crumble and time devours. So, and then you choose, and we were definitely collaborating with
Right.
each other on that too. You choose what the stakes basically are from that encounter that you had, and there are choices you can make where you lose personal stakes, like your skeleton can lose a memory or something like that.
So when you said tomb tables, I heard tomb tales.
Tomb tales,
And tomb tales. Woo!
that'd be awesome.
One of the things that's great about this game is that it gives you a lot of options and lists of things
Yes.
to choose from. Even on the character sheet, it'll give you, what are they, memories and, what was the other one on there?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about the observations.
Observations and memories.
Yeah.
And on top of all of these lists. And the cool thing about it is that a lot of this stuff is just prompts or
Yep.
seeds for things. You do not have to use them.
Yep.
But if you feel stuck, you can look through these lists and just get inspiration by these very simple little phrases and sort of go in a direction. So the game doesn't just leave you out in the middle of the lake
at my
waiting for you
badass
to swim back.
I just want to say.
There you go. That is
Look
badass.
how cool is he? And that's our game table.
But it does give you tools for you to be able to draw something from if you're drawing a blank or if you're just a little lost. And you don't ever have to even use them. I mean, there are times where I was tempted to make up a consequence or a thing after an age that wasn't listed there. I'm like, what if we did this? So, like we said before, there are so few rules to this. Just feel free to do just about anything.
So, how do you sell this game to your group? Like, we've been talking a bunch here about like what we like about it, like the good things, like some of the things that we kind of have issues with. But like, if you want to get your group together and play this game, like, what's the best way to sell it?
I mean, honestly, like I personally think you should know what you're getting into. If you've got like a D&D group and they're happy paying D&D every week, and you just want to drop this in because you're excited about it, but you kind of know they might not be, you may be fighting an uphill battle here. But just pitch the game, right? Like the premise is really cool, right? You're playing skeletons, okay. You're in a tomb, things will be falling apart. There's a tragic ending. So like just knowing kind of what you're in for, I think is kind of useful. I think it'll definitely sing to certain audiences, right? Like for me, when I hear this kind of shit, that I'm into these kind of games, but just hearing that pitch, I'm like, okay, well that all sounds kind of neat. The nice thing is, if certain people are not into, like, for example, sitting in silence for many minutes, right? Like, if that's not something everybody's really into, you can do, like, a very minor version of that. Like Tappy was saying, like, some of the choices on the sheet are, like, 10 seconds pass. Or one of them's, like, something happens immediately afterwards. So you can, like, play down to, like, the lowest denominator on the sheets and have very little of that, if that's an issue. But I think just hearing, like pitching those highlights of what the game is, like seeing if that excites people, right? That'd be one recommendation.
Now, do you guys who played this now, do you think this is a good beginner introduction to story style games?
Because of its simplicity, it might.
I do, but I think there should be someone at the table who is either comfortable being a storyteller or that can kind of push those, ask the right questions to kind of help sort of fuel that creativity.
Yeah, see, that would be my one, like things like there are so few rules to this that it might be difficult to people who are not used to this style of story games and a game that has more rules. I mean, Fiasco has more rules than this, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
10 Candles has a very good structure to it. There are other games where you tell a story where there's more structure to it. But that being said, people who don't play role-playing games, I think, could fall very quickly into this game.
Right.
Oh, I think
so it
too.
might be like the people who like an RPG game. Like you're saying, if they're really into D&D, you can just keep playing D&D. You might have to ease them more into this style of game, whereas people who don't play, you can do this and then ease them into RPGs.
And I saw, and I guess I didn't realize this when we were playing it, but that there is an option where you can use a die to kind of randomize your answering questions. So that is another thing that maybe, to avoid analysis paralysis, or if you want that more random element at the table.
That's my next band.
Analysis paralysis. Yeah.
Fucking rad.
But no, you might have to fight a couple people. But
okay.
To the point of the that's just a feature, nonetheless. To the point of the die, Jason even mentions in the rules that very specifically on a lot of these choices there are 6 of them, and that way just having a D6 kind of does that thing.
Yeah. No,
and,
I like
and
that.
You can constrict the choices and you can expand the choices. I mean, certainly you can go to the point where screw this list, I'm going to make up the shit I want to make. Or you can go, I'm going to strictly stick to whatever I roll on this D6. Some people work better with more constraints. Some people work better with less constraint.
I will tell you, I find that being forced to figure something the fuck out because I've gotten this random thing is a lot
more fun to me. Yeah. I agree.
Right. As opposed to, I know my brain, I know I'll go to a certain style of thing because that's kind of like the way I like to do it. And so.
Yeah, I like a little bit of a random.
Yeah. I will say, so that option's there. That's cool.
Yeah.
I will say to the point of bringing this to any table or pitching it to just like random people or your group or whatever, obviously you're dealing with certain themes in this game, like death, for certain, right?
Yeah.
And so the game itself doesn't, it's a fairly old game. It's been around for at least like 6 or 7 years old in the sense of indie games.
Right.
But it doesn't have a safety mechanic in it, right? So it kind of expects you to do that yourself at this point, right?
That's true.
And so that's probably a good thing to just keep in mind. Like you would want some kind of like X card thing, or like Lines and Veils is a good one, especially for games like this where you're dealing with some kind of content.
That's
like
very,
you could have content warnings.
That's very
on it, right?
true, because you wouldn't necessarily think that, but at one time, Jim, we did some body horror.
Yeah. Right.
And body horror can get very squidgy for some people, depending on, and it was all cool, but it was very cool to be aware of the safety mechanics and where we could go and push.
Also, there's a certain amount of sensitivity where you go, look, I got some ideas of some things.
Yeah.
Because this is what happened to me. I was like, I got some ideas, and they're kind of curvy, so I want to make sure everybody's okay with it. So please stop me if I'm triggering you for any reason. So, that's what kind of goes on with sort of horror games, because horror, that it's supposed to elicit that kind of emotion from you. And, it's hard to decide which line is too far and which line isn't.
No, and that's why it's just good to be conscious of that, and I thought we all very much were. And it's like, because at the end of the day, I think you're right, with a horror game, you do want to push a little bit so that there is that horror uncomfortableness, but you care more about the player, not the game. So that you want to make sure people are comfortable.
I'll say one other thing as far as bringing it to a table, like of either people who aren't experienced with it or just haven't played this game, even if they're pro story gamers or whatever, is you can play it. So it says 1 to 6 players, so you can play it solo if you want, just for like fun world building stuff.
Lonely fun.
Yeah, lonely fun. But
That's what I call character building when I do it at home. I'm like, lonely fun.
I love character building.
I do
One of my
too.
favorite things.
I have run this game with 6, and I think maybe one time there was 7 people, and it's definitely going to be a different experience.
Really?
You don't, if you're going to do it, just because you have that many people around and you want to showcase the game, definitely like have the idea of maybe being like a pseudo GM. Like you're kind of facilitating the game for them. You don't even necessarily need to make the choices, but you can. You can make the choices of what happens and kind of make them just react to it. And it actually makes the game run a little bit faster because there's less of that analysis paralysis stuff going on where people are like, oh, what do I choose, right?
Yeah.
So cool, run it for them as kind of like a GM. And I've done that at a con before. We had 6 players, and it worked really well.
Cool.
And it didn't feel like it ran very long,
nice.
right?
Okay.
So, I mean, that is an option.
And also, one of the things to keep in mind is that the game actually has pause breaks. They're built into the game.
Yeah.
Right.
I utilize those pause breaks to look at the map, to look at my character sheet, and sort of going, what can I do? What are the memories that I have options for me, and try to plan a step ahead. And so you don't have that element of like just being completely on the spot and having to come up with something instantly. There are times where you actually can start making some plans and talking to some people, or just deciding what you want to do. You can use those meditations constructively.
So one thing I want to say is I would totally watch Tomes play this by himself on stream.
As would I.
100%.
I would be there with
that.
you.
I'm not sure I would.
I might
That would be amazing.
yeah.
What would he be wearing?
No, I might drunk watch.
I might drunk play that.
Yeah.
But
You're on.
All right, it's an age. Everybody finish your drink.
you're drinking for 5 people because you're pretending you have 5 players.
That'd be kind of rad.
There's like stuffed animals around the table going, Susan, what are you going to do next?
Okay.
Bill showed me some software. It's just like some iPhone bullshit that you can do, that you can record different. That's how he did his acapella for the Masks game.
Yeah.
But that would be hilarious. I would pay you to do costumes and wigs and totally play different characters playing this game.
There's probably people who could do it better than me.
Yeah,
No.
but that sounds like
You-
fun as fuck, though.
You are
If I'm
shortchanging
inspired.
your entertainment value.
But to just put a pin on that, how would you approach other people with this game? If you have a lot of people that are constantly wanting to apply story elements to your world as a GM, that like doing that, if you have people that are constantly doodling things, these games are actually very specifically curated to develop your imagination. They give you cues, they give you mechanics by which to build stories around. With very little coaxing, I think you can take a small group of people and really sort of introduce them to the kind of game like this. You're going to be carrying a lot of weight. I think there's definitely has to be somebody that knows what's going on.
Yeah.
But when you pull them through, if done correctly and everybody has the right amount of input, I think that everybody's going to walk away from the game a better player.
Absolutely, because there is definitely a journey you go on in creating this story and this lore or whatever it goes. You pile on to what you're doing.
To me, it's like a kitchen. We're layering flavors throughout the entire time. You know, we're seasoning at every edition, and we ended up with a fantastic
and
dish.
And never
at the end.
shortchange a game that lets you draw shit.
Yeah,
I don't think I'm good at drawing, but like. I don't know.
My name is Simon.
And my shitty spiders all over the place.
No, but I love. It's like try to get the pencil away from us because we're like, no, I'm gonna draw bricks
It's
under
like,
my.
I want
niches.
blood and streams of blood coming out of crap was awesome.
And here's my guy's robe.
One other thing the game has, I don't think we mentioned this. Like the game you can get it like as a PDF, you know, for a couple bucks online. I think I do have a hard copy that I found on some. You know, like indie desk at a con once or something.
They sell hard copies on Bully Pulpit.
Yeah.
Yep.
But like it's like we said, it's pretty short. But it's got two versions of the game inside. Like one is like the initial one, and then there's a variant in there which they call Echoes of War, and it's by Sarah Williamson. And like all it is, it's the same game. It's just like the story prompts have changed slightly so that it kind of feels a little bit more like we were warriors or we were at war or something like that, right? And for the space version, I think it's awesome because like that's totally like a, you know, you can Anyways, and I was gonna say for pitching the game, like find out what the players are into. Like as any of these games, you want to know what their touchstones are. Like what kind of stories are they into as far as media, things like that, and then figure out if this fits in that model.
Oh my god,
I know.
I just thought of when you're saying that, like you're playing a Traveler game. And then, like, in one session, everybody shows up and is like, no, we're playing skeletons. And you play skeletons in a ship. And the next session, you come out of jump.
And you find
that shit.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
With those characters, the skeletons all over the place.
You could be the final encounter. You know,
well, not even final encounter, just an encounter.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, shit, remember when we did this? Or,
yeah.
I don't know why I just thought of too, because of course I actually am really intrigued by the whole idea of like the Smiths, like dead the Smiths in some sort of scenario. But I was just thinking there was something that you also said, Tappy, that reminded me of Return to the Living Dead, because that's such a 80s,
it's iconic horror.
Yeah, that you could do different kind of setups because I could totally see barely fleshed skeletons in the form of zombies.
Yeah.
That somehow get reanimated for some reason, like you're dead.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
oh no, it's your cabin in the woods.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, there's so many different options, and it's so open. and I think that's actually a fantastic point. If you can find some kind of hook, something that your players are really passionate about, and then introduce them to a version of this game that taps on that, then you're going to automatically have some more investment into what's going on. They're going to be more creative.
And honestly, even if you're playing, let's say you're playing D&D and you've got a D&D group, and you run this as like a test run, and you know it goes good or it doesn't or whatever. The fact is, like dropping it into the game later, everyone gets so excited. They're like, "That's the shit that I made. Oh, that wall with the ruins,
I really
did
like that
that."
idea, Tapping.
So of course people get excited about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the more buy-in you can get into your game, the better.
Yep.
Yeah, and you know it's a low barrier of entry. It's inexpensive. It's fun. You need 2 people, 1 if you want to be lonely. So you know, and that can be said for a lot of. I mean, Slay With Me. A lot of games that are like this, that are GM-less games, are exactly like that. And there's something kind of magical about just sitting in your living room with a bunch of people and they're like, "Hey, let's play a game," and pulling something off your shelf. And at the end of that, you have a cool looking map. You have some character sheets. You have a story to tell. And it's so easy. I mean, bottle of wine and a table, and you're set.
Or 2 bottles of wine.
Or 2 bottles of wine. Because we did have 2.
One other thing you can do with this game, and like they mention it in the rules thing, but you can play online. and I have run this online at least once, if not twice.
Yeah.
And it kind of works. I mean, if you're going to be using Hangouts or Roll20 or something like that, like Roll20, you could use the shared space there. If you're not using that, you can still use like a Google Drawing or something that everyone's kind of linked into, so everyone can kind of see and participate at the same time.
Or you can just have a cartographer with a camera on a stick if you want to do that too. And don't want to go the high tech thing. One of the suggestions that's actually made is to have somebody be the person that does the map. So not everybody feels. There are some people that are uncomfortable drawing, and some people love to draw.
Oh, for sure. And I actually think after I just said, putting drawing in your game is genius, because people, we don't realize how much fun that is once you're not a child and you don't have crayons in your hands every day. Yeah. But I actually think you could play Theater of the Mind if you set this up really well. So if you did want to play at a campfire, we used to do. In fact, I think people still do Camp Nerdly. Yeah. Where it's we did a thing called Nerdly Beach, and it was just gaming all weekend and camping. And if everybody had a phone where you could have your little playbook on your phone, so that you could read, you really could just.
But
Yosemite trip.
One of the things about role-playing games, there's so many elements of it that bring me back to an 8-year-old child,
Right?
and this is one of them. I get to play with draw spooky stuff with a crayon.
You know what? You just brought up a really good point. You could play this. Obviously, you're not going to take it to the same place as you do with a table of adults, but you could totally play this game with kids as long as they're able to read.
If you ever want to have confidence in your ability to do this kind of stuff, play this with 8-year-olds, because they tear this shit up.
My nieces are scared of skeletons. It's one of my saddest things.
Oh my God!
I have so many things to give them. They've never been over to my house because it's full of dead things.
You could skin this as the stuffed animals.
Or you
it could very well. You could take a threadbare sort of look at it, or they could just be horse statues that come to life.
And trample things to death. Yeah, they'd love that.
I want to play this with 12 and unders now.
Yeah.
I would maybe streamline the. Change the questions a little bit so a little easier to read. And
you could also take some hacking.
But if you facilitate it a little bit, you could do it that way too. Sometimes they like
just
that.
Just call it murder ponies, and
you'll get 20 people signing up, and they're all 25.
Well, and we actually, I know, right? We didn't bring this up, but Tom's had little skeleton minis and stuff.
Oh yeah, we used minis instead of they were awesome.
Hella fun just to have our little dudes on the.
The fact that you had your guys on top of one
another. Collapse on top of me.
We were married and figured out in our real life.
So, like I said, connections, dude. And you go in there with no expectations, and then you come out going, "Oh my God, that was so much fun!" And
100%.
It's these story games, like Tappy said at the very beginning, because I think that's the main takeaway that I have from this game is that it sort of builds that creative muscle. And it's just sort of like doing some push-ups and getting those juices going, because this makes you create things, and it forces you to do it. And once you get into the practice of doing that, it just becomes easier and easier as you build that muscle.
And especially with collaboration, I think that's very difficult for people to learn how to collaborate in a creative manner. Like, D&D and some RPG, like trad RPGs, do that, but they are expecting somebody to kind of help manage the situation in a very strong narrative direction. And here it's so loose, right? Like everybody's basically a GM, so like learning how to like deal with that in an environment, and it may not work for some groups, but like it's definitely it's like stretching those muscles.
That's a really good point, because I thought of this earlier when somebody was saying something, is that the other part is that this game is about the fleshy parts. It's about the narrative and the story and the lore you're creating. But some of us are also used to, even in your home games, not just streamed games, but where you want to not spotlight hog.
Yeah.
So finding that you can expand on that story, because that's what this is about, is the story. It's not like I'm using this feat and I'm rolling and then I'm rolling for damage and then there's a contested roll. And then
I've had people play are used to playing traditional games, play these kind of games, and I've seen them all the time. And I find that a lot of times when people in like D&D and Shadowrun game are very spotlighty and they're going, I'm awesome, badass, tend to shy away when they play these kind of games. Because a lot of the times what they're awesome at is making this awesome build, and they're just hacking through shit and being great and having a good time, but not so much in the in-between storytelling part. And so you find those people sort of like rescind a little bit, and some of the other people sort of like take more of the spotlight at that point when you switch over to this type of game. And also I found that people, after playing this type of game, going, I want to GM a game.
I find there are
Yeah.
certain types of games, especially ones that don't have initiative, but in general, like there's certain types of game that kind of want you and tell you to move the spotlight.
Yeah.
PBTA games are one of the specific ones that really got me moving that around. But there are other games as well, and this one in particular of like, cool, you've done a thing, and what are you doing?
Yep.
And moving that spotlight around rather than I'm doing this, and then I'm doing this, and then I'm doing this, and then I'm doing this.
I totally.
And so,
yeah.
yeah,
And
it's
also
a
it's
great
been-
muscle to
We
work out
talked
as a GM.
We talked about Atomic Robo. All credit to Mike Olson for me for that. That there's a mechanic in that game that talks about how you do that, even though there's not a turn order really
Right.
or
Right.
anything.
But
Yep.
you just need to keep
Yeah,
checking. What are
yeah.
you doing now? Even if it isn't
Yep.
necessarily their turn
But
order.
you learn also as you
Yeah.
play these kind of games that going second or third is sometimes even better because you get to bounce off something somebody else
That's
said.
very
Yeah.
true.
So and
not untrue.
I think that the number one skill that these type of games teach people, and the number one skill that I think that people sometimes lack in role playing games, is it teaches you to listen
Yep.
to what everybody else is doing and to what's happening in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just sitting there trying to plan your next step, you're actually actively listening.
And that is
Because-
one of those basic bullets that Jason talks about in that one, article that I see, moved around. But
Yeah.
but it's like I think that's a good thing to reinforce just before playing this or these type of games is, again, especially that some of those markers, listen, ask questions, be obvious, like
Yeah.
that really just like reassure everybody that, hey, you don't need to come in with creative ideas. Like I will very often be in a game like this and just throw something out, like I'm like, I don't know, and I throw some crap idea, what I think is a crap idea.
Yeah.
And by the end of the game, people are like, "Oh, that was great because then I did this
Everybody's
and this." and
dogpiling on
Yeah.
that thing you weren't sure of.
Yeah. I mean, and that's very true about yes ending too. Is like whatever
Yeah.
it's out there, it's just material for
Yeah.
you to work with.
Right.
There's no good or bad.
It's because of that loose structure that forces you to listen to people, because you can't just look at your character sheet
Yep.
and figure out what you can and cannot
The
do.
statistics do not inform what you do.
you can and cannot do is directly based on what the people in front of you are doing and
That's-
what has been done.
That is such a good point, Tappy. That's like, in fact, that might, the two biggest or three biggest takeaways from this might be kind of similar. Is that we say listen a lot, but it's seriously, it's like that we in the 21st century, in the past aughts, we say holding space. It's kind of that kind of. It's like no. We're talking about listening.
Yeah.
This is the active listening, and then it giving you. We said this Companion's Tale or For the Queen too. Good GMing skills.
Yeah.
Right.
To be able to elicit
Yeah,
those questions and move that narrative.
People have a
as
good
player.
experience in this kind of
Yeah.
game. They'll want to GM
Yep.
because that
Yeah,
that,
really
that
good
like,
point.
the idea of making stories becomes a fire
Yeah.
in them.
Yeah,
And
because
you-
it's not just being a player.
Right. You have to wrangle the kittens less.
Yep.
Because of that mechanic of what you
Yep.
can do is based on what other people do. And
Yep.
so, like, this game is looser than being 4 drinks in at a goth club. And that is really important for, like, that kind of mouthfeel of the game.
That's totally my favorite thing. I'm going to write that down in a minute.
Well, I think that we've said all we really need to say
Yeah.
about this. So I'm just going to head and close out. Everybody, please go ahead and pick up Skeletons and try it out with your game group.
Yeah.
It's a really fun game, and it'll really get your juices going. And remember, when you tell stories together, you create memories together, and that's the whole point.
Hell yeah.
All right?
Stay tuned for the calendar and Small Game Hunters in next month. So take
Next
a look
month,
at the
yeah.
calendar.
It's the last Saturday of every month, guys.
Yep. Take it easy. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If I told you the things I've seen on my ways, if I told you the things I've done in my days, you wouldn't believe me anyway. So it's best I just don't say. I've lived 1,000 lives.